For those who have careers that keep them out at sea for long periods, what is the creepiest thing you've seen out in the water? F.
Experience 1. Not so much what I saw, but what I experienced. I was once underway in the Gulf of Alaska during a November gale. Waves were up to 35 feet with some rollers hitting 45. An uncommon occurrence on the diesel-electric ship I was on was a cycloconverter tripping. When this happened, the ship would temporarily completely lose power and propulsion until some electricians could reset everything. This happened during that gale. I simply can't explain how strange it is for the boat you're on to all of a sudden go so quiet that you can clearly hear waves slapping the ship and metal bending and flexing. Knowing you're completely at the mercy of the sea. Knowing that if the ship lost its bearing and went beam to, there was a real possibility of capsizing. It's easy to forget when you're at sea that the only thing keeping you alive is a bunch of steel welded together. At that moment I was fully aware, and it humbled me. Thankfully we trained frequently for this and had everything fired back up relatively quickly. Another time I recall was when the ship took a rogue wave. They are absolutely real, and I believe they account for a massive number of shipwrecks. It was late at night, and I was on the bridge. We were passing through a storm, and we were taking the waves off the bow with no visibility. As the ship moves, there's normally a pretty standard pattern. You ride up a wave for a bit, and then you fall down the wave for a bit. Well, we started riding up a wave and got to the point where we should have been starting or riding down, but we just kept climbing and climbing. And then it happened. We started our ride down the back of this massive wave. All of us braced ourselves and tried to find something to hold on to, but we all fell to the deck anyway. Anything that wasn't secured for sea fell down all around us. Manuals, tables, computers, printers, you name it. Our captain, who was sleeping, called up to the bridge asking if we hit something. It woke the entire crew up. Rogue waves are real, and they're terrifying. I can't imagine being in a smaller boat or taking one of them broadside. Experience 2. I was in the U.S. Navy for about 10 years and have tens of thousands of miles at sea in an aircraft carrier. Countless nights on the flight deck in the middle of the night and middle of the ocean. Creepiest, a huge patch of the ocean glowing. Like nuclear waste in The Simpsons glowing. I've seen bioluminescent algae of a few kinds, and this was nothing like it. I've never seen anything like it before or since. Weirdest thing, hundreds of miles out to sea from land, and there was a massive fire on the water. It was like the top of a gas refinery, but on the water with nothing under it but water. Flame going a few stories into the air. Saddest, a fellow sailor trying to jump overboard. He apparently got a Dear John email and pictures from his cheating wife and decided to end it. We were on the smoke deck. He bummed a cigarette, then asked the time. We said 2300 hours. He replied, "Sounds like a good time to die," and in one motion tried to launch over the chest-high wall, with an opening to the water below. Luckily, we were faster than him. We grabbed his legs and wrestled him down and laid on him and basically hog-tied him till the MAs, Navy cops, got there. Broke my heart because he was a good dude. I never saw him again. He got transferred off the ship shortly after. Not sure what happened to him, but I hope he's doing better. Funniest, 2 flying fish collide midair. I was smoking when we were in the Persian Gulf and saw the fish fly from a pretty far distance towards each other. I remember thinking there's no freaking way they're going to hit them, splat splash. I was in tears laughing, but no one saw it. Everyone just thought I was a weirdo, but I got to see a miracle of nature, LOL. Experience 3. Some 20 years ago. On the MV Explorer, since sunk, down near the Antarctic Circle, sailing around the bergs and occasionally making landfall. We rounded into a small bay area, and there, amongst the ice and coast, was an unmarked sailing yacht, which is odd as generally yachts have some identifying markings on them. To add to it, they didn't respond to any radio contact, and whilst I wasn't privy to the conversation, and it was a long time ago, some crew went across via Zodiac and were refused boarding. So basically, a yacht, not a particularly large one, that was unmarked was hanging around in the inhospitable waters of the Antarctic and didn't want any help or contact. Proper weird. Experience 4. The bioluminescent animals, or whatever they are, in the water are pretty amazing. Our toilet would fill up with seawater, and if you took a piss in it in the middle of the night, it would agitate the water and it would glow sometimes. Experience 5. Always love the bioluminescence flickering around the hull at night. They're almost like a cushion of little stars guiding you safely along. On those really dark, moonless nights, I'd almost beg for them to arrive. I sailed a 70-foot yacht around the world a few years back. Southern Ocean, Cape Horn, Good Hope, Roaring 40s, Furious 50s, 2 equatorial crossings, the full deal. Plenty of terrifying moments, boring moments, funny moments, and beautiful moments. A creepy moment that is burned into my memory involved a near catastrophe halfway between NZ and Cape Horn. We ended up hitting really bad weather and absolutely huge seas, 50 feet swells with massive troughs in between. We were running with the swells for days as they grew, skidding down them like a bloated surfboard, always worrying that the next wave would break behind us and roll us over. At night it's pitch black down there, in bad weather the sky and sea just form a huge black mass. The most terrifying thing is the sound of an invisible wave breaking behind you. At night, you run red light to preserve night vision, so there's basically just an eerie red glow emanating from below deck. At about 2 in the morning, I was at the helm when a monster wave broke directly over the back of us without a second warning. Time slowed down like it does in those moments, and the last thing I saw was my own silhouette in the wall of water, lit up like an ominous red snow angel, and then nothing but cold blackness as the boat sunk into the sea. Fortunately, she popped straight back up like a cork after a few eternal seconds, almost like a submarine surfacing, and we were still in one piece. I still can't forget that glowing red apparition of myself though. The memory of it has woken me up in a cold sweat more than once. Experience 6. Somewhere in the Atlantic, nice cold as hell night, decided to step out and look at the stars. After about 10 minutes a boat mast pops up, sits there a few minutes and then back under. No alarms, nothing. Just some sub boys getting a bit of late night O2 in the middle of nowhere next to some friends. Experience 7. This sort of qualifies. Former Navy here. Somewhere off the coast of Italy saw a very, very small boat, not much bigger than a rowboat, about 9 or 10 miles offshore. This was sometime around midnight. There was no light from land and no other ships around. It had a light. Our ship captain said it was a fisherman and the fish would be attracted to the light at that time. Imagine being in a rowboat about 10 miles offshore in the middle of a pitch black night, waiting to see what finds you. Experience 8. Not so much creepy as eerie, but being out in the blue at night in a lightning storm in a slack wind. The ocean was very flat, no big rolling swells, just tiny little ripples. The whole world would be black, and then there would be a flurry of bolts, and the whole world would be silver. The ocean looked like nothing so much as aluminium foil that had been scrunched up and flattened out. The water looked like mercury, and all the little ripples made these very dramatic black shadows. Experience 9. The creepiest thing I've seen has definitely been seeing myself and other crewmates lose our minds. On one particularly awful voyage, everything that could go wrong went wrong, and we found ourselves without food, water, and sleep for a very unhealthy amount of time. It started off with auditory hallucinations. Ships are noisy, and when you're going crazy, you begin to think those noises are talking to you. I heard children laughing, a choir singing, and creepiest of all, a particular splash sounded like it was calling my name from the sea. Combine that with visual hallucinations, and then things get really terrifying. I was convinced we were in the desert at one point with sand all around us and mountains in the distance. Another crew member freaked out and told us we were about to run into an apartment building. The creepiest thing I saw was an all-black flying pig with red eyes on the bow. I think the scariest though was when someone was convinced we lost part of our crew overboard. It turned into a massive, delirious argument over where everyone was, even though we were all accounted for. That trip was brutal, and the captain put us all in a terrible situation due to sheer incompetence. Other than that, there was this one time I saw 3 gigantic ships in the distance with no lights, and they did not show up on AIS. Suddenly they were gone. It was extremely creepy. Experience 10. I was drinking in an airport bar and met a woman who worked as a commercial fisherman on her way to SE Asia for R&R with her family. Real salt of the earth lady. She regaled me with stories about her work, all the good stuff about working in her world, all the reasons she kept doing it for decades. I asked her what the scariest thing she saw out on the open ocean was, and, without any hesitation, she said, "Oh, an underwater UFO. I saw one rise up out of the ocean next to my boat and fly off into the sky." The matter-of-factness of her answer bothers me to this day. Experience 11. One time on an airport trip, my Uber driver was saying that he used to do security on tankers. They would run across empty vessels more than you could possibly imagine, just floating, contents undisturbed, wallets, photos, everything. They would hail them with no response, and, not knowing if it was a trap to get close enough to take over the ship, pirates and ransoming the ship is apparently also more common than you'd think. Not the people though. Just the cargo. Anyway, the security team would have to board the ghost ship and scope out the situation, even yachts. When there was no one aboard, they would sink them to avoid floating strike risks. I was like, surely there is some kind of finder's fee, and he was like, who are you going to call? Made me really wish a John Krakauer or Sebastian Junger would sink his teeth into that story. It would be a hell of a book. Edit, it seemed like there was no central body to call to salvage it. You're in international waters, so there's no Coast Guard. He implied that anyone who lost track of a ship like that likely lacked the resources/desire to retrieve it. I imagine the ship recorded in their log when they came across other vessels, but whether that information goes up to some authority, I don't know. Being myself in supply chain management, I know that oceanic shipping can be seriously sketchy, so although I can't corroborate the story, and part of why I posted was to see if it scared up any similar stories, it was related to me as fact and didn't strike me as a tall tale. Experience 12. Right. Long-time a lurker, a first-time poster here. I'm no longer at sea, but used to as a younger chap with romantic ideas spending months on end on cargo ships. Mostly tankers, crude oil VLCC and refined product tankers, but with a little time in oil and gas and towing, I came ashore in 2017 with a Master Unlimited ticket, sailing as chief officer. My last ship was a self-discharging bulk carrier. Anyway, I digress. It wasn't so much about what I saw, which was creepy. I saw plenty of interesting things I wouldn't have seen anywhere else. However, I was second mate on a tanker distributing refined oil products around the coast of New Zealand. A yacht had sailed from a port on the east coast, bound for another port just down the coast a bit, but it had disappeared. Solo sailor on board aside from his dog. Nonetheless, the search proved fruitless, and it was suspended. However, for weeks afterwards, at about 1:30 in the morning, the Rescue Coordination Center would broadcast a plea at the end of the weather and navigation warning broadcast asking for the yacht to make contact if it could hear the message and was able to do so. I'd sit in the dark, chain smoking and working on my 7th cup of coffee, looking out into the black. Imagining the guy who's had a stroke or heart attack on board with the same broadcast playing out on his radio while his dog ate his face to keep from starving, or imagining him having fallen over the side. Imagining what it'd be like watching your yacht sailing indifferently off into the distance with your dog in the cockpit pacing and agitated, unable to do anything about it. Knowing you were screwed and had a matter of hours if that left to live before the cold got you or exhaustion. Or imagining the dog starving and dying on a yacht by itself weeks later, listening to the same broadcast in the dark. The places your mind goes in the dark by yourself. They found the yacht in the end. The dog was still alive. Experience 13. I was in a glass-bottom boat in the 1970s off the coast of Oahu. We were going out to see a pod of whales. The boat captain was a grizzled old Hawaiian sunbaked to the color of mahogany. It was an older boat, retrofit with a glass bottom and bench seating. He was narrating over a PA as we left the dock. We motored out for about 30 minutes and the view out of the bottom of the boat was disappointing, just long streams of bubbles obscuring the view. Finally, he stopped the boat, and the view was simply amazing. The captain pointed out a pod of whales about 1/4 of a mile away. They were cavorting about, diving and jumping. The captain was explaining their behaviors, but keeping his distance. It was pretty cool. All the whales suddenly dived and disappeared, emerging moments later, right next to our boat. They were swimming all around us, diving and jumping and splashing us with water. Children were laughing, and everyone thought it was part of the show. They were right there, almost so close that you could touch them. The captain told us how lucky we were to see them up close. Suddenly, the mood changed when they started bumping up against the hull of the small boat. People were sliding all over the place, some fell onto the floor, and children were crying. Most telling, the captain had stopped narrating and had a look of abject terror on his face. I remember thinking about what it must take to make this guy scared, and as he looked terrified, we should probably be too. Suddenly, as quickly as they appeared, the whales disappeared. They were just gone. People picked themselves up and sat back down, mothers consoled children, and we started back to the dock. The captain got back on the PA and tried to downplay the seriousness of what just happened, but there was a definite quiver in his voice as we headed back to shore. Experience 14. One night on the 00-04 watch in the Persian Gulf on a military transport, the whole sky went from pitch black at 2 o'clock to fully lit in a second. This went on for about 30 seconds, then back to pitch black. We called up the neighboring ships and HQ. No one knew what happened. Our best guess was a meteor. The second story was a couple of years before the first, cruising around the Philippines and seeing nothing at all visual and on radar. All of a sudden, we see a faint white light about 100 yards off our port bow. Typically, we don't let anything get within a mile of our ship. Grab the binos and head to the bridge wing, and there is just a little banker boat with his outboard motor and a flashlight. Even with radar, NVGs, and an infrared camera, we couldn't see this guy's little 20-foot boat in a 6-foot sea without lights on. Obviously more crazy stuff than creepy in my career so far. The people are the craziest thing you will experience at sea. Had one guy who wouldn't go outside the skin of the ship at night because the aliens would abduct him again. Experience 15. I worked on a sailboat one summer in the Bahamas, and something that you see a lot when you're in the ocean is kayaks and life jackets floating around, and you always radio them in, but they always just fell off a yacht or something, and it's never a big deal. Once we found a kayak floating, and it had a fishing rod in the rod holder, which basically meant someone was using it. Edit. Didn't see how viral this went overnight. Some people were asking questions. The Coast Guard doesn't really even look into this stuff unless there is a confounding report, so we never received an update. Not that I would have expected one unless there was a full-scale search. We went up close to it, and it had the removable seat cushion still in, which further convinced us that someone had been using it. There was nothing else to see. The line was in the water, but we never really revisited it. We tried not to talk about it because the kids on the boat got creeped out after the adults kind of freaked out and didn't control their emotions.
We hope you enjoyed listening to today's stories. If you want to see more stories, check out these videos or check the links in the description for more videos. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And ring that notification bell.